Jacksonville. The child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts. Poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history, this land of flowers.
From WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network, the week that was on the 11th of January, 2020. This is Boston Red in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth as we normally are here. The Iranian military authorities announced that they did, in fact, shoot down the Ukrainian plane during a highly confused, stress-laden episode the same night that 500 kilometers or more from Tehran, the Revolutionary Guard forces had fired on some U.S. military installations. No casualties were reported in those, just some minor property damage, and an announcement by the Trump administration in the form of President Trump himself that there was basically no foul, that things would calm down a bit in that area. Very interesting situation there. Now, this all started with the assassination of General Seramonte, get him right in a minute here. Anyway, he was a major general in the Revolutionary Guard forces, and he was assassinated at Baghdad Airport. Evidently, as the story folds out, he was on a mission. He had a letter from the Supreme Leader to the Saudi Crown Prince. So that part of the story of this whole episode that started on Wednesday and ended on, that started actually last week, and on Wednesday they had the so-called retaliatory. We were looking at that episode in terms of stages of retaliation, and we had pegged it at about 5 or 6 hits back and forth from the sides. In other words, you had the original attack, which is the assassination of the general, and then you would have a retaliation, and then you would have another attack and a retaliation, another attack and a retaliation, so forth and so on. Well, that did not happen, at least to date, but there are some other forces that are there, that one of the generals in their leadership was also killed. So that is a wild card out there, and there are a number of wild cards out there, and we just don't know at this point in time how this will all pan out. The administration in the U.S. here placed additional sanctions, which are no more of an economic violence on Iran. Will it have any effect now on Iran? Iran, incidentally, has faced various types of sanctions since 1979. Very long time. And they have become more and more self-sufficient. They manufacture various items that they could not get during their sanction regime. And one of the sanctions here is on manufacturing goods and several other things that Iran actually either seeks or would be getting on the quote-unquote open market. The major problem with any type of sanctions in a modern global capitalist system is that you impede the markets. And that can, of course, be can hurt one nation, in this case Iran, but it also can hurt the trading partners that normally be selling things to Iran. So you have to look at it in those terms. The U.S. economy created, according to the latest figures now, we'll have more on Numbers Man, which is now known as the Numbers Man Show. That's our macroeconomic economics program that we partner with Cranston Analytics. The number of jobs created on this would have been in Q4, fourth quarter 2019. It does not have that much of an impact in its own. What's happened now, most economists and analysts now look at more than one quarter, 3 quarters, or what have you, to get some sort of pattern. In terms of U.S. manufacturing has been in a downturn, a recession for quite some time now, and no doubt will continue into the first quarter of the year. Now, it's not unusual in the fourth quarter to have revisions, and you'll have some of those out there. It's not the last word. But as far as the psychology of the market is concerned, people hear these numbers, and depending on their perspective, is 145 good job growth, or would they're looking at more or less 200,000. That goes up and down, and once again we'll look at some of those numbers will come out from various people. At the same time, the fallout from the Boeing Corporation, that the makers of the engine, the Spirit Corporation of Wichita, Kansas, laying off about 3,000 workers because they make the engines for the plane. So you'll have those kinds of situations occurring. Many of the layoffs are not 3,000. They are smaller, such as what happened at Mack Truck and some other trucking companies. Few hundred workers at best, but it does count up. And in some areas, depending obviously on where the plants are located, the jobs are some of the better paying jobs in the community. In fact, Spirit is the number one employer in Wichita, Kansas, about 13,000. But they make other products for Airbus, etc. In the U.S. and in many countries, manufacturing has always been a wild card because it is based on supply and demand. And if demand is down, supply is up, adjustments are made. And of course, now you have what amounts to real-time inventory, so that adds a different variable to the entire situation. It's sort of like the news out of Iran. Things go very, very quickly. The cycle is speeded up. The question we asked is the consumer of the information able to absorb this? Because there are certain information that you get, polls, history lessons like Andrew Jackson's home in Tennessee, visitors there. The consumer information does need to know a little bit of history. And without some general knowledge of history, there is a handicap occurring here, particularly in a fast-moved, fast-paced situation where you only have a minute or so to hear the news event. That some people are confused as to what happened. Andrew Johnson was the person. He was impeached and tried by the Senate. One vote saved him. Period. That was the closest impeachment process the U.S. has ever had. And Bill Clinton was a totally different situation. There was voting in the Senate on the rules of witnesses, etc. Monica Lewinsky, she was involved there, may have had a statement. It was 100-0. This time around, you will not have that situation, highly polarized political landscape. Nancy Pelosi, who is the leader in the House, is planning to appoint managers to spearhead the prosecution of DJ Trump and thus transmit the two articles to the Senate. Now, there's been some speculation by some of the talking heads, so to speak, that old man McConnell outmaneuvered Nancy Pelosi. Well, that could be the case, but one has to appreciate that old man McConnell, in the case of the Senate, had 4 aces in his hand because he has the votes, and the Senate will decide if they call witnesses. If they don't call witnesses, the pace of the entire inquiry. Thus, the whole impeachment process rests in the coat pocket of the leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell of Kentucky. And that is one of the items that the House leadership, Nancy Pelosi, can do nothing about. And because of the scorecard in terms of where the votes are, the Republicans have 54 votes. And by simple majority, they can pass anything that they desire. There can be some debate, but they can also cut off the debate. And at the same time, to convict of the president, that's 3/4 of the vote. So the Democrats will not have that majority with the way the Republican setup is now. And then the debate will go on. Did the impeachment process help the Democratic Party in this year and in the fall election? Or did it help the Republican Party? Well, the answer to that question will be on November the 5th, or November the 6th anyway, the day after the election is decided, and then, of course, we'll be talking about it for another 4 years. I recall back in the old days, the 1968 election at the University of Michigan, we were still talking about it 4 years later, analyzing. Of course, at that time, we did not have a big data. So now you have big data, you have AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Results of patterns come much more quickly. Now, can the prognostication process, of what we call psephology, can we absolutely say who will win and by how many votes? No, is the answer to that. But however, you have polls out there, a lot of polls. We will have that on the Monday Morning Quarterback, any current polls. We don't have any today. But what effect that will have, we have some models out there. Professor Amowitz, who is connected with the Crystal Ball, that's the University of Virginia, at Charlottesville. Of course, we always pay homage to Heather Heyer. Incidentally, last night on the on Friday Jobber, our recording mechanism was off when we did the crystal ball, so we're going to have to do a little summary of it in this broadcast. Basically, the topic was two congressional districts. You have two, one in Nebraska and the other one in Maine. In Maine, you have actually two there, but we were highlighting, I believe it was the second congressional district in Maine, and then the district in Nebraska that is Omaha, Lincoln there, from the rest of the state, and how the electoral votes go in those states. So if we have time, we'll take a look back at it here. It will go now to Boeing and some emails that came out of Boeing there between various people there. And this is from the Washington Post, Michael Loris there, and Ira Duncan. Anyway, instant messages and other internal documents revealed Thursday showed company employees discussing the efforts to manipulate U.S. international safety regulations. It was the title of it here. Yes, I still haven't been forgiven by God for covering up as I did last year, said one of the messages in 2018. Another exchange between a Boeing worker from August 2015 closed with this: "I know, but this is what these regulators get when they try and get in the way. They impede progress." Well, I suppose. And one of the more interesting here said this airplane is designed by clowns who in turn are supervised by monkeys. That was in 2017. The documents were released by Boeing, Boeing's as it's called in Seattle, to congressional investigators probing the 737 MAX jets, who were certified by the Federal Aviation Commission as safe before crashes killed 346 people. The communication paints a deeply disturbing picture of the lengths Boeing was apparently willing to go in order to evade the scrutiny from regulators, flight crews, and the flying public, and even its own workers, from sounding an alarm internally. As from the chair of the Transportation Committee, Peter DeFazio of Oregon, had issued some of the message was whether simulation training should be required for pilots flying the MAX. Boeing went to great lengths to prevent such a requirement, in part because it would be costly. In other words, there was a money value there. And this is what happens when you have self-regulation and administrations such as the Trump administration that are opening up more opportunities for various companies in industry sectors to self-regulate. Many of his proposals will allow mining concerns and various other drilling concerns to avoid regulatory regimes. And this is always in favor of lowering the costs and so-called business burdens. Well, the 300 plus people were a business burden. The only thing Boeing could say, the communications don't reflect the company. But it did. The company added it's not found the instance of misrepresentation to the FAA with its simulators qualification activities, and we remain confident in the regulation process for qualifying these simulators. So the FAA said it has reviewed more than 100 pages of documents, and our experts determined that nothing in the submission points to any safety risks that were not already identified as part of ongoing review. Well, this is not factual. The message underscored how important to Boeing financially, and that was the reason that the former chair of Boeing was terminated. But the problem is the new CEO or chair is, in fact, was on the Boeing's committee. So there's going to have to be a lot of things going on here to convince the general public and not only the FAA, but regulators in various countries, period. The chief technical pilot, whose name is redacted in the document, said failing to get computer-based training for one system is a planet killer for the MAX. The 2017 message, the chief technical pilot wrote several of his colleagues to stress the importance of holding firm that there will not be any type of simulator training required. Boeing will not allow this to happen, the pilot wrote. We'll go to face-to-face with the regulators who try to make it a requirement. Another email chain, the chief technical pilot forwarded to Boeing's colleagues in messages in which he persuaded an airline which is not identified in the documents not to require simulator training on the MAX. Senator Wacker, he's from Mississippi, chair of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. These communications suggest a troubling disregard for safety amongst some of the Boeing and raises some at Boeing, and raises questions about the efficiency of FAA oversight certification project. In a shift, the company said it's recommending that pilots undergo simulation training before they resume flying the 737 MAX. Well, they will be required to do this. Boeing is just trying to spin this message here. The message released by Boeing also showed workers voicing concern over deficiencies with the simulator itself. So the simulator is a component that's based on software. Also, would you put your family on a MAX simulation trained aircraft? So this whole thing back and forth here with Boeing, and this is widely reported, not only in the Washington Post, but in various news outlets, whether they be electronic news outlets on the air or programs like this one that's out there, that's being scrutinized. Simulation training is very important. And what Boeing's basically said, well, you can do simulation training on a pad device or on a home computer. Well, yeah, I used to have at one time, a long time ago, when I was dealing in custom-made computers, and I had a pilot every year would call me up and what the price of computers were. This is when computers cost several $1,000s. Nonetheless, at that time, Microsoft had a simulation game. I forget. I think it was called Microsoft Simulator, a long time ago. But anyway, I asked him how well does that program perform as to the simulator that you use, and he said it's very, very similar to it. Of course, he was an experienced pilot. And the problem he had was of using the simulator, he needed a faster computer. I think at the time for those when we had computers, he actually had an entry level. I don't even think he had a 286 machine at that time. That's a 16-bit machine, NARI 386, which we're going more towards 32-bit. Now we have what's called 64-bit machines. Anyway, in the very early days of computing, the power was simply not out there. The memory was not out there, 4 or 8 megabytes, I forget now. But anyway, totally different ball game from today. So what that brings about is that technology has leapfrogged. Now, a pad, I'm not sure whether it'd be an iPad or it'd be an Amazon pads, which are a pad that has a Google Chrome on it, a Chromebook, they call them. Those are not known for a lot of power, so I'm not certain what kind of simulator you would have on those pads. But that in itself is totally up in the air. Inadequate training. Of course, lawsuits are flying. Boeing's is losing billions of dollars as a result of this catastrophe out there in the name. I mean, what intelligent person would fly a Boeing free Max, if was it 337 Max? Yeah. So this is one of those situations will be out there for some time to come. The latest numbers we had, I mean, for when they could start to get certified, is March, and some think it'll be in the summer. So these planes will be out of quite a while. And once that happens, then the airlines themselves have to certify it. So this plane could maybe not fly again until the summer or the fall of 2020, if at all. So that is the story of Boeings. Let's go. I'll go to Uncle Carl now. He usually writes on the weekend, and we have old Uncle Carl. He's right on the politics of Soleimani, General Soleimani here. On the 9th in the Wall Street Journal, the killing of the Iranian Major General Qasem Soleimani has produced President Trump's biggest foreign policy challenge yet. Will Iran be content with a Tuesday night's barrage of missiles, or will there be another attack on Americans or on American allies? So much depends on what the former British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan called events, dear boys, events, and of the unpredicted reaction they so often provoke. As of Wednesday, both the U.S. and Iran appeared de-escalate, a new term in the political act. A good thing. Let's hope that lasts. No one should shed tears over the General Soleimani. During the Iraq War, he gave sophisticated and probed explosive devices to insurgents to kill and maim Americans. He doesn't talk about what the Americans, despite a U.S. ban imposed in 2007. He traveled to the Mideast to create, train, finance, and direct a vast network of what Uncle Carl's calling proxy fighters to attack the U.S. and its allies on behalf of Iran and its extremist Islamic ideology. Played a key role in the Iranian nuclear weapons and missile program. He had bloods of tens of thousands of Americans, Muslims, neighbors, and fellow Iranians on his hand. As for the political ramification, Mr. Trump's approval ratings won't jump as it did for Ronald Reagan after Grenada. Grenada was a little island in the Caribbean, and George H.W. Bush after the First Gulf War. Well, they don't jump very much anymore. G.W. Bush after 9/11, or Barack Obama after the death of Osama bin Laden. The late, great Jerry Pippin and I covered that live the night that Osama bin Laden was killed. And remember, there was somewhat of a little jump there. It didn't stay up very long. And in 9/11, actually, Bush did get a jump after the 9/11 operation there. Recall, we'll look this up for you. Amongst Democrats, former VP Biden responded to the attacks by defending the Obama administration's nuclear deal with Iran and demanding a sober-minded explanation of Trump's decision and its consequences. This came across as defensive. Biden's declaration that democracy runs on accountability unfortunately brings to mind the Duncan slogan. Far worse was Senator Bernie Sanders, who compared Trump's strikes on Soleimani with Vladimir Putin's killing of Russian dissenters. That he sees as a bloodthirsty terrorist, at the moral equivalent of a self-proclaimed socialist who honeymooned in the Soviet Union. Well, it was the Soviet Union now, not the Russian Federation, suggesting that Trump wanted a wag the dog moment. Elizabeth Warren told reporters, the question we ought to focus on is why now? No doubt. The idea that the presidential campaign manager Brad Parscale, as Trump's Stanley Mossett is a far-fetched event from her South Bend Mayor Petey was less furious than feeble. I'm interested in the process, he said, wondering if the president's action was legal. Well, there's some that wonder about that in the resolution, but again, that doesn't really matter there. DJ Trump is not concerned with legal niceties. All this deepens the sense of many voters that Democrats are unwilling to take hard steps needed to keep Americans safe. Now, this whole issue of keeping Americans safe, being safe, is one of the red herrings that the right always raises. You can't be safe or keep America safe unless you have the right tools, the right combination of tools, and anyone that is that thinks that this type of adventurism, the killing of an Iranian general, will make Americans more safe is a ninny, because it's just simply not the case. Period. It escalates tension not only with Iran and the U.S., but with many of the other revolutionary groups in the Mideast. Period. And at the same time, you not only have groups out there, but you also have individuals that are too numerous to identify. We don't know anything about them, and they don't know anything about us. But it does up the level there in this whole get safe situation, depending on what would happen. This crop of presidential candidates appears more scornful of Trump than of Soleimani. Well, the situation there is that all the Democratic candidates that spoke condemned the late General Soleimani, showing themselves to be rightful heirs to Gene Kirkpatrick's San Francisco Democrats, who'd rather blame America first. Gene Kirkpatrick was a reactionary that's now late. Gene Kirkpatrick is long gone. Turning abroad, Soleimani's death may have helped unify Iranians, and for now, the massive crowds for his funeral were partly generated by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' presence, pressure, and only a few weeks ago, demonstrators crowded the streets of Iranian cities to protest the regime's failure to deliver jobs and prosperity, sometimes singing out the wasteful foreign engagements that Soleimani led. Whether they now back the Ayatollahs is an open question. Well, what happens is the Iranian people, many of them that were in these demonstrations, now were backing the regime as a matter of national pride. Period. The Iranian regime, as Uncle Carl calls it, of course, being under sanctions for 40 years there, and of course there's shortages of many, many things that they would normally be able to get on the open market that they can't get because of the sanctions. There's no doubt about that. And it causes increased misery. So they are not a happy people. Period. But they are a relieved people, at least from the interviews that the American monopoly news media is doing, and they didn't sleep because they assumed that there would be an attack because of the death of General Soleimani, and at the same time there'd be a retaliation and another attack and another retaliation, so the bombs would be flying around Tehran and the countryside and anywhere else. So this comes back to the airline crash, the airline being hit, because that was an area where there were a lot of sophisticated military installations there, high-value ones. So someone shot the missiles into the air, and that was the end. But the whole problem is, why did the civil authorities in Iran allow this aircraft to take off? Now, it was several hours after the initial attack, but it's still at the same time, as in any situation like this, it becomes a little bit confused. So we have confusion, and we have admission. And how does this affect various things? Well, it's a little bit different now that you have the admission. You have the teams on the ground, and they'll soon be on the ground from Canada, from France, from Ukraine. They'll be looking at the wreckage, identifying bodies through DNA, various things that these types of investigators investigate. So there'll be a final report on this, probably months in the future. There'll probably be some immediate leaks. But where does this resonate with the American people? Well, it's one of the closed chapters in a long book. Will it affect the polling? We'll see. I doubt it very seriously. It will. The pressing issues out there now will be the economy and how it performs. And again, this is just the first quarter. How it performs in the second quarter, and more importantly, in the third quarter. Let's see, is reporting. Yeah, we should have third quarter reporting before the election. So that's time for change model would come in there. Now, if the economy for some reason goes into a mild downturn, it depends on how long it will last. There are a lot of variables out here. And if you're looking as your reference point to the market, it was down. It hit 2,900, a magic number. 28 was the number that it lurks in now. That can be artificially generated. So once again, we'll talk more about that on the Numbers Man program there, and there's a new survey out from Pew. We'll look at it also. And we'll look at some information from the Philadelphia Fed. To get too much into that one, we have also an open source report. Let me just skip on here. We'll do another Washington Post real quickly here. This is from the Elizabeth Warren's campaign. This is an old situation. She is courting, as they used to call it, rivals that are no longer in the campaign. She's talking to them. She's talked to, who has she talked to here? Kristen Gillibrand of New York dropped out in late August. She talked to her about family leave over tea. Kamala Harris, she's talked to her. Will this translate? She's talked also to Leon Castro over the holidays about a possible endorsement. That may help her a little bit, may not. Courtship of one-time rivals is more than just flattery. Quite part of a strategy. It's becoming more urgent to craft an image of a consensus candidate. Can unite a fractured party whose wings are often represented by the two rivals, Bernie Sanders and Joe Lunchbox Biden. Now, this is something I was not appraised of at an event in Brooklyn. Showed how Warren's efforts can pay off. Castro, who endorsed her within days of dropping out of the race, told the crowd what the senator from Massachusetts wanted to hear. More than any other candidate in this race, more than any other candidate who is going to be on a debate stage in a few days, Elizabeth Warren is a candidate who can unite the entire Democratic Party. Incidentally, Marianne Williamson, the writer of various things, motivator, had laid off her staff. Now she's officially dropped out to make room for another progressive candidate. Now, Elizabeth Warren is positioning herself as a unity candidate, is a shift from her fiery liberal position. Recent week, Warren's increased her national TV appearances, and again taking more audience questions at campaign events. I'm running in the primary. I want to have the chance to beat Donald Trump in November. Still, there's a risk that she fail to energize either camp, and not all her efforts have been successful. Now, one of the party's most coveted endorsers, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who endorsed Bernie Sanders. So she didn't get that. But supporters hope that by carefully building such relationships, Warren can overcome what they see as an exaggerated image of her divisive figure, particularly in wake of her recent attacks on Little Petey. One of the things I've been unhappy with her is being too nasty to others. That's from Bernie Frank. He used to be a Congress type from the Commonwealth who worked on the Financial Services Committee was Frank. Efforts also plays a Warren's attempt to convince Democrats that she's the best candidate to take on DJ Trump. It's an interesting scenario, no doubt. She's a grassy-roots candidate. She's been in Texas, Oklahoma, and those kinds of places. She could play in red states. She's raised or donated $1 million to Democratic candidates. That was in 2018. So she's been around. All these candidates have been around. But the clock is ticking, period. In her mind, the greatest hat trick can get to another candidate to adopt and push forward their ideas. Well, a lot of candidates have done this. After speaking with Harris in December, she adopted part of her signature plan on abortion, model on the Voting Rights Act. It requires states with patterns of violating Roe v. Wade's landmark 73 case of establish a constitutional right to abortion. Well, that's a far-fetched thing. Anyway, some of the candidates have perfunctory conversations with Inslee. Well, Inslee's out of Washington State there. I'm not sure, but Inslee would help her. He never really generated much excitement. Has an environmental record. And Kristen Gillibrand, I always was the opinion she would do better than she actually did. Saw her at the National Action Network's convention. Anyway, amended her campaign site to praise Gillibrand's tireless advocacy on family leave. No doubt about that. Warren policy hasn't always closed the deal. In La Ocasio-Cortez, she co-sponsored the Senate version of the Green New Deal. Well, co-sponsored, but Bernie got the endorsement. Something Alton never caught on either. Warren told Andrew Yang that she was in the middle of reading his book, The War on Normal People. Well, Andrew Yang's done pretty good. A warm relationship. This is Marianne Williamson here. There, no doubt, she probably does have a warm relationship with Marianne Williamson. But Marianne Williamson is now in the history book. So that doesn't really say much about where Liz Warren is or where Liz Warren is or not. Let's just get this Justice Department winds down Clinton-related inquiry once championed by Trump. This is a pattern of DJ Trump. When things don't exactly go, he disappears. Barrett, one of the writers here, Justice Department inquiry launched more than 2 years ago to modify conservative claims and clamoring around more investigations of Hillary Clinton has effectively ended with no tangible results. John Herbert, or whatever, U.S. Attorney in Utah, was tapped in November 2017 by the then Attorney General Beauregard Sessions to look into questions raised by Trump and his allies. The FBI has not fully pursued the case of possible corruption at the Clinton Foundation, etc. In part of his review, examined documents and conferred with federal law enforcement officials in Little Rock, Arkansas. People familiar with the matter said current and former officials said that her bail was largely finished and found nothing worth pursuing. Well, this is when things are just overly pursued. Now, largely shift its focus to different federal prosecutors tapped to do separate special investigations. This is John Durham, who the Attorney General appointed to explore the origins of the 2016 probe into possible connections between the Trump campaign and the FBI. Sessions did not appoint a second special prosecutor, but weeks later sent a letter to Herbert telling him to review a wide range of issues related to Clinton, including the foundation, Uranium One, and none of these things went anywhere, period. And conservative lawmakers, particularly then Senator Bob Gillette, who was chair of the House Judiciary Committee, and members of the Freedom Caucus, were initially encouraged by his assignment, seeing as a sign that Clinton faced new legal jeopardy. Was a prosecutor with bipartisan credentials, hadn't been named a U.S. attorney first by Barack Obama. But from the start, senior officials in the Justice Department viewed Herbert's task as unlikely to lead to anything of significance, and it did not lead there. Clinton and her family have been subject to significant law enforcement over scrutiny over the years, no doubt about that. And the Clinton Foundation has faced investigations, and none of these basically went anywhere. Herbert's work has been distinct from a number of sensitive investigations into political cases, including Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz's probe of the FBI handling of the Trump investigation. Herbert's assignment was separate from ongoing investigations overseen by Durham, and the Department of Justice officials believe the Connecticut Attorney General will be far more consequential. Durham is weighing whether to charge a former FBI lawyer for altering internal emails that misled other officials, and this is before the FICA court. According to the Post, Herbert's task was nebulous from the start. Some people involved in the matter, he was said to be reviewing, expressed surprise that they were not contacted by the U.S. attorney and were privately what he was doing. Some considered him more reviewer than investigator. Well, that's what he was. And of course, Beauregard was pushed out of the Justice Department, and now he's, I suppose, running for his old job back. And O'Barr had served as Attorney General during George H.W. Bush, a long time ago, term there. And again, this, Uranium One, Toronto-based company, acquired a controlling interest there. This is when the Atomic Energy Agency acquired, in which Russia's Atomic Energy Agent and Rosantos, Rosa there was involved in it. Anyway, none of these little low level scandals around conservatives also demand an aggressive investigation of whether wealthy individuals and governments may have made donations to the Clinton Foundation. That's an old talking point, which never really got anyone, period, out there. I think I'll save this for next time. Let's see if we have anything else here. No, there's nothing there. I'm looking at the LA Times over here. I don't really have anything from the LA Times, but sometimes it does help just to look at maybe the headlines and see where they will take you or don't take you anyway. There's an old headline here. Oops. They're now by Iranians. Well, that's over now. Anyway, that story is effectively closed. Will it die? Well, more or less will. Because Americans suffer from a lot of what could be called overload. You have these stories out here. They're intensely covered, especially after the holidays here. Nothing else is going on. If you listen to any of the political programs, they were all covering that. I was listening at National Public Radio. They were covering all of that program, basically the same thing, some Canadian rail, period. So basically it's the same thing. And the Boyne story, it excluded it some, but Boyne's is still a big headline. Impeachment died under the assassination of Soleimani. You don't hear much of impeachment, period. And that's kind of the story. Well, out of California, I see the gig law. This is California's gig law. Doesn't apply to independent truck drivers. The rule, so independent truck drivers can, if they own their own truck, what have you, can be independent contractors. And this is the LA Times. Pelosi's delay strategy on impeachment articles is a question. Well, this is, once again, this is why she's transmitting those over with very tenuous period. Taco Bell offers $100,000 salary and paid sick time. I'm not sure what that is. Maybe we'll have that on the Monday Morning Quarterback. Get that headline up. Don't have it now, and let's see if we can. Let's see if we can get the main story here. We don't have it yet. Probably won't mess with it for now. We'll try to stick that in some other broadcasts as we normally do. Nonetheless, we've run out of time here. This is Boston Red in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on our political side from WBRN Radio. The Monday Morning Quarterback. We'll hopefully have some of our basketball scores, talk a little bit about sports. We don't cover the NFL, but again, they have some division playoffs this weekend going on there as they get ready, heading to their Super Bowl. These bowl games, it's sort of like the NBA and the World Series. It extends into the latter part of January, last of January, and into February, that they finish up with their Super Bowl. So you have the NFL championships and the AFC. Those two conferences that at one time were independent. Now it's all the NFL. So it has changed over. So the weekend, let's see, what do we have going on? We have San Francisco host the Vikings, and then we have the Seattle Seahawks. Lambeau Field, very cold. Green Bay Championship Series. I hadn't looked at any of where they are, but now in the NFL, and this is something we have on All About Sports, the business of sports. Now in the game, you can put your bet up by looking at some current statistics supplied by the NFL through a third party there, and you can wager on the game. So something to note. Spring training will begin in a few months. We're in January, and we'll be in February, and here comes spring training in 2020. Good day.